Lawliet is often regarded to be one of, if not the greatest detective in all of anime and manga. Even in the end, he was still able to outsmart Light from beyond the land of the living, thanks to his successors near Mello. We've already seen how L performed in the Kira case, a crime that had supernatural elements, so how would he approach solving the monster case? This may seem like a massive downgrade or an outright sweep for L, but that would be underestimating the perpetrator of the case, Johan Liebert. L would be dealing with someone who's just as intelligent as Light and arguably more manipulative, as Johan's words have the power to change the entire ideology and goals of countries. For any newcomers, I have covered L vs Johan in the past, but it was more so comparing each other's feats and abilities, whereas in this matchup I'll be focusing more on the case aspect, scaling the case's complexity than seeing if L can solve it, as this was made in 2022, and it was less scaling and more hypothetical, to be as fair as possible to both sides. Rather than put Johan in the verse of Death Note, which is far more modern than his own since we don't really know how Johan would do in a modern world, we'll place L in the monster verse. He will be replacing Heinrich Lunge, and for the sake of the video, you can say that L has the same amount of influence as he does in his own verse, which will allow him to have more creative control over how the case goes. The win condition for L is obviously apprehend Johan with solid proof and have him convicted under the eyes of the law, whereas Johan's win con is just to avoid being convicted, but if it comes down to it, killing L is also valid as a win condition. It may seem unfair to only give this to Johan, but it's made clear in Death Note that L would consider it a loss if Light, or in this case Johan, died. As in the Change the World novel, Light himself to prevent L from solving the Kira case. And even in the original anime, L's successors consider the game being a game of evidence. Same way L could never prove Light was Kira because there was no evidence, even if he knew Light was Kira. With all that being said, let's get into the video, starting off with what makes the monster case so hard to solve, and honestly, the monster case has the most misconceptions I've ever seen on the internet. So let's go over why this is actually hard to solve. The monster case involves Johan Liebert, a child born from a eugenics experiment to create a superior race of human beings that possess the necessary looks and intelligence in order to change the state of the country. The eugenics experiment, combined with being abandoned by his mother at birth, led to Johan undergoing deep-seated trauma that would mold him into the monster that he is today. He was very overprotective of his sister and would constantly murder their foster parents in fear of them letting the monster return. This continued until they end up at Czech-German border and would be found by an officer named Helmut Wolf. The twins didn't have names, but a book was found on Johan that was called The Nameless Monster. The boy in the book was named Johan, hence how Johan gained his first name, and Wolf just decided to name the girl Anna. Wolf's mistake was sending the twins to different orphanages, as Anna would be sent to Orphanage 47, though Johan would be sent to Kinderheim 511. It's here that Johan experienced the true horrors of humanity, as he was drugged, abused, and placed in a program to create perfect soldiers. Johan wanted to escape, as not only were his memories of Anna fading, but even his own sense of self. He had gobbled up so many names to the point where he had no idea who he truly was. The only thing holding Johan back was the drugs administered to him, which put him to sleep and made him forget. But over time he developed a resistance to said drugs. He then formulated a plan to capitalize on the hatred of the orphans and project it onto the adults, which would cause an uprising, and result in 50 children and 50 instructors to fight amongst one another and kill each other. He would then meet a boy named Christoph, who he'd saved to formulate a 10-year plan with before he'd split up and find Anna. The two would travel across the country before being picked up by the Lieberts, which is how Johan gained his extensive knowledge in economics, as well as his last name. Whilst this family truly loved him, they made the mistake of letting the monster into their home. And that wasn't Johan, that was none other than Franz Bonaparte, the creator of the eugenics experiment. The twins appeared on TV with their surrogate parents, and Bonaparte was watching. He truly had no malicious intent and wanted to visit the twins to make sure they were truly taken care of. He visited them and left, but Johan was awake. His past trauma never left him, and he assumed the worst. He would take the loaded gun kept in the house and use it to shoot his parents. He'd attempt to hide the evidence as usual, but Anna would be awake. She'd find Johan and what he did, leading him to believe he was beyond forgiveness. He asked Anna to shoot him, which she would do. However, Johan was saved by Dr. Tenma, who decided to save his life over the mayor's. Johan would repay this kindness by killing the chief officer that fired Tenma, which allowed him to advance his career. Johan would then flee the hospital, dropping off Anna to a new foster home before he'd leave to kickstart his plan of destroying the world and to be the last one remaining. He'd need to amass as much influence as possible, which he started by creating a money laundering business at the age of 15, which grew to become heavily known in Germany's underworld. However, he soon became bored with it or something, he kind of just left it, and after taking some of the money, he left the rest amongst the others to just fight each other over the wealth. He would then use this wealth to hire serial killers to commit murders, all of which were people that were related to Johan's past. But now, you'll come to understand that Johan is extremely intelligent, on a disturbing scale. He's had an otherworldly cognitive ability since he was a child, which allowed him to carry out elaborate strategies and plans to keep himself safe. But Johan's most powerful asset is his manipulation. His words have the power to kill, and they've held weight since he was a child. He's so cracked in manipulation that he can utterly brainwash a person and write the names of people in sandboxes, leading to them being brutally murdered. What's even scarier about Johan is that he's someone so admired, but yet so unknown. Nobody except the viewer, Tenma, and a few core people in the series know about his past, and anyone else is either dead or disposed of. What makes this case so challenging is that there is no sort of digital footprint, let alone a shred of evidence to prove that Johan Liebert is alive and well in society. After all, there's no birth certificate or journaling of his youth, and the only sort of info to prove that Johan existed would be in the eugenics experiment, which had countless documents relating to it in the Red Rose Mansion, but Johan burned it down. He's so good at killing any trace of his existence that despite attending a local college and living in a dorm, Lunge searched the entire room and outright came to the conclusion that no human could exist in such a room. What also makes Johan so difficult to catch is the time frame of Monster, which primarily takes place in Germany throughout the late 90s. The technology back then is nowhere near as advanced as it is in Death Note. While his cameras, live recordings, and wiretaps did exist back in the 90s, they weren't nearly as efficient as they are currently. The only way that Johan's existence could be proved was through Dr. Tenma, but the fact of the matter is, Johan wanted Tenma to know that he existed. Why? Because he knew nobody else would be able to fathom such a being. As I stated earlier, Johan's goals change throughout the series. Originally, his first goal was to become the last human left standing, but this goal changes once he reads the nameless monster in the Munich library, which reawakens his long-lost memory after the 511 Kinderheim experiments where they drugged him and made him lose his memory. He then switches his goal to his true purpose and decides he's going to find Franz Bonaparte and kill him by reenacting the Red Rose Mansion massacre in the small town of Ruenheim, where Bonaparte is revealed to be staying. He would then conclude everything by committing the perfect suicide by killing anyone who knows about him or his past. This goal initially started in Germany and would have spread throughout the entire world, but he changed his goal and decided to get rid of Franz Bonaparte. The perfect suicide plan is a complex one for fans of Monster and for good reason, but you need to understand why Johan would want to erase himself from existence. He had no name, no identity. Anna was his only reference point to how a human being should feel. All he had was the story of the nameless monster, and he had to choose. Which monster could he identify with? Which monster could he deeply resonate with? The one that accepted their identity as nameless or embraced it? Or the one that wandered aimlessly and searched for his true name? Which was tragically a mission doomed to fail since he was nameless after all. His identity is that of a nameless monster. His search and efforts to assimilate a name for himself are useless. In order for that name to exist, to give you a sense of self, happy memories, or at least some sort of memory must be attached to it. Ideally, hearing a person that matters uses it in relation to you. But Johan had none, due to the countless experiments at Kinderheim 511 and the Red Rose Mansion. The perfect suicide is inspired from the final passage of the book. Please remember, Johan always said that he does not exist. He wants to make that true, because that will finally give him an identity. He will truly no longer exist, not physically and not symbolically, through the memories of others. The suicide would complete him. Going into more detail of Johan's manipulation, Johan's understanding of the human mind is on another level, and because of it, he can perfectly assess anyone's psychology, behavior, and motivations. He sees their mind and soul at first glance, allowing him to perfectly predict what people will do and how to manipulate them. He has perfect observational, perceptive, analytical, calculating, tactical, and deductive skills. These allow him to perfectly predict, understand, and control anything, no matter how simple or complex, easily. These skills, along with his charisma, allow him to create convoluted plans and control anyone into doing what he wants easily. Johan leaves such a strong impression on people that he can convince legions to commit murder, play suicide games, or do other monstrous things after just a single encounter. According to Heinrich Lunge, this process involves altering the fulcrum of someone's identity. Much like removing a map's coordinate axis, the more jumbled their lines become without that foundation, the more room Johan has to redraw or redefine their maps in any way he sees fit. When posing as his twin sister Anna, as they do look alike so he can do that, Johan visits Jang-suk's mother, an elderly woman suffering from dementia, and a very advanced one at that, in a mere conversation where he has her look back on her limited memories, while at the same time Johan ensures the woman is in the right emotional state to ensure that what he aims will happen. He manages to draw her out of the mental fog, making her remember so much information to the point where it seemed she was not even affected of dementia anymore, as she was recalling distant particular memories of her past, and managed to identify Grimmer and Tenma upon their previous arrival, also managing to remember who her son Jan is. This displays an insane level of psychological advancement that Johan has grasped. It's not even about the timeline which Johan is in, and his intelligence shows that. No, he's on a different level, literally. His influence is also nothing to gawk at. There were 2 points in the series that he managed to amass massive influence. First was when he was a teenager and created the underground bank that Germany's underworld used for money laundering. The second, when he was following through with his original plan to become the last remaining human. He initially planned to get close to Shuvolt and become his successor, and Shuvolt was a prominent figure in the European economy. Essentially, Shuvolt is one of the richest and most influential men in Europe. So if Johan was able to manipulate him, which he initially did, he would be able to destroy Europe's economy and start a war, which would lead to a doomsday. Johan targets Shuvolt to take his money and influence. Johan isn't motivated by greed, he simply just needed Shuvolt's money and influence to further his own goals. Johan's charisma, as I stated earlier, is also one of his strongest abilities, as he's able to create loyal, submissive, and downright obedient allies who will murder and commit various atrocities in his name. Overall, his influence spanned throughout all of Germany and would have been global had he followed through with his original plan. So with all this being said, how could L possibly solve the monster case? Well, it's going to be challenging, but it's not impossible. L, like Johan, is also somewhat of a mystery, and also kind of like a non-existent being. He's only known by the higher-ups of the world as the greatest detective, until he makes himself known for Kira. But nobody knows L's real name or past. He was raised in an institution designed to create geniuses, but everything past that is a blank slate. What makes L far superior to Lunge is that whilst he can be obsessed, prideful, and a sore loser, it's not as if he's unwilling to open his mind to a new perspective. Initially, he was practically losing his mind over the Kira case as it just didn't make sense. How could someone kill so many people at once? This went on until he learned Shinigami exist, as well as the Death Note, which allowed him to realize just how Kira worked. L has dealt with the supernatural and overly extremely odd cases before, so a case involving a genius killer with no identity yet a massive amount of influence wouldn't be that unusual for L. With the amount of influence and wealth that L has, figuring out Johan wouldn't be impossible, and if anything, L could expedite the process by looking in the right places, as he himself is someone who's hidden his real identity from the world for all of his life. There's also the fact that L could just psychologically profile Johan with ease, as seeing how he was able to figure out what kind of person Kira was before even meeting Light face to face. While this you could argue it was easier for L because he and Light are 2 sides of the same coin, it's still impressive that L was absolutely certain on what kind of person Kira was, especially considering he's dealt with all sorts of criminals, some incredibly stupid, yet others being somewhat intelligent. But L also has other feats of psychologically profiling many people before, so it's not uncommon. While this Johan is also a genius, he isn't perfect. There are flaws in his plan that could be exploited, and pieces found that lead to his next location, which were found by characters like Tenma, Anna, Richard, and Suk. While as you could argue that Johan intentionally left these pieces, which he definitely did, Lunge and Richard were still close to Johan's trail, both of whom were people that had no role in Johan's plan and were only considered to be a nuisance. One of these instances is which there's a flaw in Johan's plan would be the poisoning of the former Czechoslovakian secret police. Johan gave Petra the whiskey candies so that he and his associates would die, which makes sense until you realize Petra was offering those same candies to multiple different people at work, including Suk himself, the same person Johan needed for information. Johan had no way of controlling who ate the candies, in all honesty got completely lucky that his plan didn't result in the death of the guy he needed. Neither L or Light based their plans off luck, and rather based it off multiple scenarios that could occur. Sort of like how Ainakoji's planning has contingency on contingency, to the point where there's not really any gaps that can be exploited. There's also the fact that, like Johan, L isn't above using people as pawns. Who's to say he would even have to go to Germany in order to solve the Kira case? With the right connections and people, he could just send people to investigate for him, while commanding their every move and creating strategies for them to follow, as he did with Naomi Misora during the Los Angeles BB murder case. So, could L solve the monster case? Honestly, yes. It would be a bit difficult, but as I keep saying, it's not impossible. L has none of the weaknesses that Lunge possessed, and is just Lunge on Trembolone. He has taken on the Kira case and was able to single out Light amongst the entire population of the world. And you also need to remember that by the time L would be placed into the Monsterverse and given the rundown, it would already be made clear that the mass killings are happening in Germany. The population of Germany was around 80 million, which is vastly lower than the world population during 2002, which was 6 billion, which cuts out like 75 million people right from the get-go. Narrowing the monster case down to Johan is practically child's play in comparison. Also, for those who believe that Johan could somehow convince L to kill himself if the two were to meet or psychologically break him down, that's just not happening. L is a borderline sociopath. Might sound crazy for you to hear. And is so detached, he views himself as an outsider amongst humans. He's so detached like that. Like Johan, he doesn't value his life at all. To him, winning matters more than anything, and he's shown time and time again that he's willing to sacrifice himself if it means solving the puzzle. He has proven time and time again that unlike Light, he is not ruled by his emotions. Using and manipulating others genuinely means nothing to him, even if he feels a semblance of guilt. He's willing to put that aside for the greater good. Johan would attempt to exploit L's mind and use anything at his disposal, but even then, it just wouldn't break L. This is also assuming that Johan is able to find out about L's past, which is slim to none. The only chance of that happening is if Johan somehow brainwashes Watari, but L would be a step ahead of him, and I doubt he'd send his most valuable assistant in blind. So, L is dropped into the Monsterverse, gets informed of Johan, and from there it's up in the air. He does as much research and info gathering as possible, and from here, L can honestly solve the case in whatever way he desires. He could lure Johan in via using Anna, just find Johan directly, and have him brought in after proof is shown. You can name any scenario or way that L decides to do things. My video does point out some scenarios that he could do it. But one thing is for certain, that being L will solve the monster case by any means possible.